Just go with it. 2011. Movie synopsis by Zillur Movies Recapped. Danny Maccabee, Adam Sandler, is a profitable plastic surgeon in Los Angeles who feigns an sad marriage to get ladies, after having been heartbroken on his wedding ceremony day 20 years in the past. The one girl conscious of his schemes is his workplace supervisor Catherine Murphy, Jennifer Aniston, a divorced mom of two. At a celebration, Danny meets Palmer, Brooklyn Decker, a sixth-grade math trainer. Without his wedding ceremony ring on, they usually have a connection collectively. The following morning, she finally ends up discovering the ring, and he or she assumes he was hiding the actual fact he was married. She refuses so far him as a result of her dad and mom divorced attributable to adultery. Danny goes to Palmer's faculty to attempt to woo Palmer again. As a substitute of telling her the reality, he tells her that he's getting divorced from a lady named Devlin, named after Devlin Adams, whom Catherine had talked about was an outdated school sorority nemesis. Palmer then insists on assembly Devlin, and Danny agrees. Danny asks Catherine to pose for him. They usually buy groceries on Rodeo Drive to purchase her garments so she will be able to appear like a trophy spouse. At a resort having drinks, Danny and Palmer are greeted by a maid-over Catherine, who provides them her blessing. Nevertheless, after listening to Catherine speaking on the telephone together with her youngsters, Palmer assumes that her youngsters are Danny's as effectively, which Danny goes together with. Danny then privately meets with Catherine's youngsters, Maggie, Bailey Madison, and Michael, Griffin Gluck, to get them to play alongside. Initially Catherine is livid, however she reluctantly agrees. Palmer meets the youngsters, with Maggie utilizing a faux British accent. Michael blackmails Danny in entrance of Palmer to take all of them to Hawaii. On the airport, they're shocked by Danny's cousin Eddie, Nick Swardson, who has taken the disguise of Dolph Lundgren, not the actor, an Austrian sheep salesman and Devlin's lover. On the resort in Hawaii, Danny and Catherine run into the true-life Devlin Adams, Nicole Kidman, and her husband Ian Maxtone Jones, Dave Matthews, who allegedly invented the iPod. Due to Catherine and Devlin's very long-time rivalry, Catherine introduces Danny as her husband. Danny and Palmer spend time with Maggie and Michael, throughout which Michael breaks down. He says that his actual father will not find time for him, inflicting Palmer to get upset. Palmer resolves to spend time with Catherine so Danny can spend time with the youngsters. Danny teaches Michael methods to swim, and Catherine and Palmer look on in admiration at Danny's successful the youngsters over. Catherine runs into Devlin, who invitations her and Danny out to dinner. Eddie agrees to take Palmer out within the meantime. At dinner, Devlin asks Danny and Catherine to inform one another what they admire most about one another. They find yourself saying trustworthy issues to one another, with Catherine admiring his humorousness, and Danny liking the truth that he is by no means needed to deceive her. Danny and Catherine begin to really feel a connection. However, when Palmer and Eddie return from their dinner date, Palmer means that she and Danny get married. Danny and Catherine are each shocked by her proposition, however Danny finally agrees. Danny later calls Catherine relating to his confusion. However, Catherine says that she might be taking a job in New York Metropolis she talked about to him earlier to start out recent. Palmer confronts Catherine relating to getting married to Danny, as she has observed Danny's emotions for her, which Catherine dismisses. Catherine then runs into Devlin at a bar and admits that she made up being married to Danny to keep away from embarrassment. Devlin confesses that she's divorcing Ian as a result of he is homosexual and likewise that he did not actually invent the iPod. Catherine confides in Devlin saying she's in love with Danny though they will not be collectively. Danny, nonetheless, reveals up behind her, telling her that he did not undergo with marrying Palmer and that he is in love with Catherine and the two share a kiss. Danny and Catherine proceed their trip without Palmer, who heads again to the mainland alone. Assembly knowledgeable tennis participant, Andy Roddick Brooklyn Decker's real-life husband, on the airplane journey again who shares her pursuits. Some day later, Danny and Catherine get married. Summaries on a weekend journey to Hawaii. A plastic surgeon convinces his loyal assistant to pose as his soon-to-be divorced spouse so as to cowl up a careless lie he instructed to his much younger girlfriend. Danny, Adam Sandler, should have interaction Catherine. Jennifer Aniston, his trustworthy assistant, to Foe to be his quickly to be ex-wife. Danny should Foe that he's married, as a result of he lied to his dream lady, Palmer, Brooklyn Decker, probably the most attractive girl on this planet. To maintain the girl he loves, protecting up one lie quickly turns into many lies. Danny, after getting burned in an earlier relationship, decides to keep away from dedication by telling each lady he hooks up with that he is married. However, when he meets a stunning younger lady named Palmer, he thinks she could possibly be the one till she finds out he is married. So as to preserve their relationship nonetheless going, he tells her that he and his spouse are getting a divorce. When she insists on assembly her, he asks Catherine to pose as his spouse. Catherine takes a name from certainly one of her kids. Palmer assumes that they are Danny's, so desires to satisfy them. And it is at this assembly that Catherine's son tips Danny into taking all of them on a visit to Hawaii. Simply Go Along With It's a 2011 American romantic comedy movie directed by Dennis Dugan and written by Alan Loeb and Timothy Dowling. It stars Adam Sandler, who additionally co-produced the movie, Jennifer Aniston, Nicole Kidman, Nick Swardson, and Brooklyn Decker, and is a remake of the 1969 movie Cactus Flower. Manufacturing of the movie started on March 2, 2010. The movie was launched on February 11, 2011, by Columbia Footage in North America. The movie grossed over $214 million, making it a field workplace success. Nevertheless, it obtained destructive critiques, with criticism for its plot and enhancing however reward for its writing and appearing. It gained 2 Golden Raspberry Awards for Worst Actor and Worst Director. In 1988, in Lengthy Island, the longer-term heart specialist Danny Maccabee, Adam Sandler, overhears the nasty dialogue of his wife-to-be and her pals on his wedding ceremony day about his huge nostril, his household and himself, and he calls off their wedding ceremony. Danny turns into a womanizer and makes use of his wedding ceremony ring to deceive ladies and get laid. 23 years later, Dr. Maccabee is a effectively succeeded plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills that also makes use of his wedding ceremony ring to get ladies to mattress. When he meets the youthful mathematic trainer Palmer, Brooklyn Decker, in a celebration, they've one evening stand on the seashore and Danny has a crush on her. However, Palmer finds his wedding ceremony ring on his pocket and he lies to her, telling that he's divorcing from his spouse. Palmer asks to satisfy his spouse, and Danny asks to his longtime assistant Catherine, Jennifer Aniston, to pose as his spouse. Catherine accepts. However, issues get extra sophisticated when Catherine, who's a single mom, receives a telephone name from her daughter and Palmer learns that they've 2 kids and asks to meet them. Now Danny bribes the 2 kids to journey to Hawaii to spend a few days collectively figuring out one another. When they're on the airport, Danny's good friend Eddie, Nick Swardson, unexpectedly joins them, telling that he's Catherine's boyfriend, anticipating to journey to Hawaii with the bills paid by Danny. The group arrives in a flowery resort, the place Catherine meets her college foe Devlin Adams, Nicole Kidman, that's lodged on the identical resort. The overrated Simply Go Along With It is a disappointing and unfunny comedy with Jennifer Aniston, Adam Sandler and Nicole Kidman. The absurd and unethical story, if terrible, and even Adam Sandler appears to be irritated with a poor efficiency. His unconvincing character is a liar and womanizer, successful to bribe kids to maintain his lies and to marry a lady that he has seduced utilizing successive lies with none ethical worth or ethics. His assistant Catherine not solely accepts to take part within the scheming to lure his girlfriend, but additionally permits her kids to be bribed and accepts the invitation of her enemy to have dinner collectively. Palmer is a moron, successful to imagine on probably the most unrealistic tales. His finest good friend is an entire dummy and disloyal, successful to reap the benefits of a scenario to journey together with his bills on Danny. There are the same old exaggerations of the up-to-date Hollywood productions, with Danny expending plenty of cash in fancy and trendy boutiques and within the suites of the resort. Additional to the unrealistic plot and unlikable characters, the jokes are foolish in occasions when ethical values appear to be much less vital than a straightforward mindless chortle. My vote is 3. Director Dennis Dugan was liable for plenty of comedies with funny man Adam Sandler, From blissful Gilmore to large daddy within the 90s, to the more modern fare of I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry, you do not mess with the Zohan, and grown-ups. I am a giant fan of a few of these if I could say low forehead choices, however hey, do not berate me for having time. As with a lot of the comedies Sandler has starred in to this point, most straddle between two broad areas of being humorous, and but having some main drama and or romantic fare to bulk up the working time, making the movies appear extra like two halves put collectively. And Simply Go With It's no completely different. Primarily based on a French stage play and an earlier movie referred to as Cactus Flower within the 60s, therefore making this a modern-day remake of kinds. This film has each all-out, riotous scenes designed to make you chortle, but having depth following a tried and examined formulation for a romance, which will get catalyzed by just a little white lie that grows uncontrolled, needing as one character places it, an index card to maintain observe of the sprawling tales they've to inform and preserve at so as to not puncture their respective ruses. So the comedy right here entails lies and truths, with Adam Sandler's famined plastic surgeon Danny discovering out the ability of sympathy and the intercourse that comes with it together with his carrying of a marriage ring, solely that he hasn't obtained married simply but taking part in on how some swingers simply like to get it going with married males. Simply when he is critical about Palmer, Brooklyn Decker, a extremely younger lady for his age, she finds that wedding ceremony band, and he cooks up the story that he is really getting a divorce. Palmer needing proof meant Danny's persuasion, with advantages in form of his assistant, reception Catherine, Jennifer Aniston, a divorcee with two youngsters, to pose as his quickly-to-be ex-wife, after which roping in her kids Maggie, Bailey Madison, and Michael, Griffin Gluck, to pose as his as effectively. And it goes two methods, since Catherine has a factor about her rival from Faculty for a few years. I shall not title this a list actress in order to not spoil the shock on her comedic efficiency, so do not go up wanting imdb.com, okay. And makes use of her pretense with Danny to attempt to sustain with the Joneses. For sure their scheme of being husband and SPOU. Say means to maintain up with the multitude of lies for every completely different situation, both Danny's or Catherine's, which naturally result in some enjoyable eventualities. However, the funniest in fact belongs to that between Sandler, Madison and Gluck, one who decides to ham it up with a British accent, whereas the opposite is simply plain somber, and their tip-high act because the father-children attracts numerous of laughter since Danny typically finds himself being blackmailed by the youngsters, who are doing an ideal job. The photograph-taking scene on the golf course is priceless, and presumably one of many funniest within the movie. Then comes the dramatic, romantic half, the place you'll be able to see it coming from a mile away when each Sandler and Aniston's Danny and Catherine come on display, with their banter, the premise, the setup and such all spelling formula, and you may nearly know what occurs between them. The romance between Danny and Palmer then seemed like a shade of Ben Stiller's The Heartbreak Child in a means, and like many different romantic comedies like Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Hawaii serves as the right backdrop for friendships and relationships to unravel, and likewise to offer the Hilton Resort one other main product placement alternative after Up Within the Air. A movie like this may by no means avoid bathroom humor, and they're right here by the truckloads. Sure, it is lowbrow typically, however an effective way to distress after a tough day's work, since you recognize precisely what you are in for, and the movie delivers simply that. Simply Go With It's at occasions dreadfully boring and intensely unfunny because it approaches the 2-hour mark and we're nonetheless ready to chortle. It is among the most egocentric, laugh-free comedies I've ever seen, barely saved by the gorgeous surroundings and likable Aniston. However, even with these two minor enhancements that we see what Simply Go With It's actually about, low-cost laughs and cliché Sandler shtick. This was based mostly on a Broadway play that later turned a 1969 Walter Matthau movie referred to as Cactus Flower, that later turned a French play, that lastly turned this. I say this story has its tank run dry as this story will not be solely not humorous, however sort of unhappy. Sandler performs Danny, who referred to as off his wedding ceremony day when he heard his spouse speaking behind his again together with her pals. Going to a bar together with his ring on, he attracts a ladies and tells her a sympathy story resulting in them sleeping collectively. 25 years later, He nonetheless wears the marriage ring and continues to sleep with loser bimbos to kind of by no means run the chance of falling in love. This works, till he meets Palmer, Decker, a good-looking ladies who finds the ring in his jean pocket. Danny panics and tells lie after lie that he's married, however getting a divorce to his workplace employee Catherine, Aniston. Lie after lie leads him to fake fathering Catherine's two bratty youngsters who he plans to faux kill off later. The household, Palmer, and Danny's good friend all plan to go to Hawaii. The place extra nonsense takes place. Some scenes, notably the hula contest and the scenes on the child's playground, go on for means too lengthy, and it is nothing however a poorly written joke made to be fully not humorous. I assume we're imagined to root for Danny in hopes he'd get the lady. However, I discover no likable qualities, a few womanizing loser who will not be in the least intelligent or humorous. That is yet one more film that could possibly be over if Danny had instructed Palmer he does sleeps with a number of ladies saying he's married and has a nasty spouse. He may then go on to inform her how she's completely different in an actual passionate means and take her out to a bar they usually can get to know one another. Which may've made a means higher movie. Nicole Kidman reveals up in FAI. RLY, presumably the worst position she's ever been provided as Devlin, Catherine's outdated rival. What a coincidence she is staying on the identical resort in Hawaii as Catherine on the most handy time when she is all tied up together with her household points. Additionally, within the film is Nick Swardson, who is certainly the worst particular person on this film, taking part in an in-depth good friend of Danny's sporting one of many worst German accents I've ever heard. Each scene as he's in is simply too lengthy and by no means humorous in any means. Not even good for a nasty chortle. It comes as no shock. Simply go with it's directed by Dennis Dugan, who labored on different dangerous comedies like The Benchwarmers, Large Daddy, and Grown Ups. It appears Ever Since I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry, an honest comedy. Dugan has had nothing however enjoyable inserting Sandler in each character potential. Now he's engaged on Jack and Jill, one other comedy that pairs Sandler and Al Pacino collectively. God assist us.